Well, you guys are up early.
We are up
Yeah,
pretty
and
early.
it's a Sunday morning too. So, yeah,
For me? You're doing this for me? I mean, what's
yeah,
wrong with you?
it's all for you.
Jim Eagen, welcome to the Range Project. We're really, really excited to have you on the show. Back in 2019, I believe it was, you very graciously gave us a tour of the Synapse School. Synapse? Do you say Synapse or Synapse over there?
We say synapse, you say synapse.
Oh, there we go.
They both work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you very graciously gave us a tour of the school. Steve and I thought it was absolutely a spectacular model of education. And so we wanted to kind of follow up and find out a little bit more about your philosophy in education, the genesis of the school, how it's running now, how you got through COVID, a whole bunch of other questions. And so I guess to start with, how are you going now post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, we really thrived during COVID. It's interesting. We talk about this all day long, but our school, as you know, when you came here, it's really rooted in innovation, asking big questions, taking on challenges. It's a lab school in terms of its orientation and its philosophy. And so when COVID hit, we didn't shut down or panic or what have you. It was more of like, okay, what would it be like to run a school during the pandemic? And so we partnered with Stanford University. I reached out to them, found some folks who could, connect me with some epidemiologists and some pediatricians and doctors over there. And they were like, hey, let's do it. Let's set up a testing apparatus at the school. We'll come in and we'll monitor things. And we got to work hardcore during that summer. It was really tough on my, I put together a task force, sort of I think I called it like a sprint team of people we were working every day setting up our infrastructure. And so we stayed open when most schools closed, and we were, moving right through the pandemic up until now with really a lot of grit and tenacity and our stock as a school, I think, went up, right? We got a lot of coverage, obviously partnered with Stanford University. The Rockefeller Foundation actually printed something, and they sent it out to the White House, and then sent it out to all the schools in America. Rand Foundation, Rand Corporation put it out, and we were highlighted in that. And so it was a little overwhelming, right? I was getting asked to be on all kinds of podcasts and talking all over the place. And we were just working, we're like, how are we going to do it? We just did, our mindset was like, this is curious. Let's figure this out. And then let's share what we find out. So the partnership with Stanford was, two nonprofits coming together, and then putting out research documents around our testing process and all the adaptations to our campus that we put in for COVID, in the with the eye towards the future, right? Like what should schools be doing about air filtration, forever, right? Like schools are notorious for having not so great air, right? I don't know what it's like there, but our teachers every fall prior to the pandemic were like, well, I guess I'm gonna, get ready to get sick. Here comes the flu season. Here comes the cold season. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What if we improved air quality, not just for COVID, but for just health, and then share that knowledge with everybody and see what they can do in their schools. So we're in a great.
Did you involve the students? I imagine your philosophy is kind of like using contemporary issues and making authentic learning experiences come out of them. So how did you involve the students in that whole process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the students are involved in almost everything we do here, but the tricky part during COVID is they're absolutely, it was scary at first, right? And the anxiety that everyone felt and was coming in from the outside made it difficult for us to get too close with the kids. But the kids were involved in the testing study with Stanford. So we had researchers and doctors coming here. We had a tent set out outside, and so the kids were part of that weekly testing right from the beginning, and then we moved it to daily testing, right, to see. And then we were really early on the rapid test stuff, and so the kids were involved in all of that from the beginning. Parents had to sign obviously consent forms, but what the researchers and doctors wanted to know was, okay, how are kids going to handle this? How are they going to be afraid of the swabs, right? So it was pretty basic at the beginning. And then as we progressed through the pandemic, the kids were involved in also meeting with the researchers, telling them what they thought were concerns on campus. Are the hand sanitizers in the right spot? Are kids putting the masks on when they go outside? What grade levels are not adhering to the masks, things like that. So at first it was pretty intense. It's obviously backed off since then.
Your parents must have, there must have been a fair bit of anxiety among the parent body, right? Like through this time. And I wonder, our headmaster here at Scotch was very particular with the way he was communicating with the parent body every week or so. How did you lead parents through all of that? Because I imagine having to get everyone on board and get real clarity around the messaging. How did that work for you?
Yeah, that was the most important part. I mean, I don't know if your headmaster would agree, but like that, sure, we tested and sure we had all this stuff and sure Stanford was here, blah, blah, blah. But it was really that communication piece, and then the cadence of how I sort of set that up from the beginning. And it really started, which is interesting, where I was trying to write an email to the families, giving them an update. So the pandemic sort of hit for us, March? So it must have been sometime in March. And I was overwhelmed with what I was trying to put in the email, and I'm going to have to edit this. And I'm like, oh man. So I just turned on my iPhone and just spewed it into a video and then shot it out to parents. And they were like, that was awesome. They were like, that was great. And our parents, we have parents who work at YouTube. We got parents who work at Netflix. So they started giving me some tips, and they're like, yeah, you should send those out every Friday. So I started sending those out every Friday. And then I did a town hall on Zoom on a Monday. And again, the parents gave me feedback. They were, that was great. Can we do that again next Monday? And so I set it up like every Monday night, 8:00 at night, town hall, and everybody in the school would come. And then on Friday was a video update. And then we had these just-in-time emails that went along the way, but it was Monday, Friday, and I'm still doing it. Monday, Friday. And I'll have a Monday town hall. And every time I'm like, are we really going to have a couple hundred people show up again? And they do, they keep showing up. And so I think that communication, and I heard this from parents, they said that really just ease their nerves. Like they would log on to that town hall, and they would see, they could answer any question. There was no real format, but they also were able to see me, my assistant head of school, Deanna Mayer, my lower school head, Katie Morgan, director of technology, Isha Jane. And we were laughing, we're talking, we're telling jokes, and they're like, oh, all right, things must be okay at school, because they're having a good time, and they're, giving each other, ribbing each other, even, and it was a bit of a show. We weren't faking it, but it was, we need to show parents that like, we're okay. Things are okay.
So you've got some obviously massive clients there, and in big industries, lots of money. Why do they send their kids to your school? And I guess this probably comes into, what is Synapse? What's your philosophy? And why do parents want to send their kids to your school?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we're so super fortunate, sitting right in Menlo Park. It's like the heart of Silicon Valley. Facebook's 2 miles that way, and Google's 8 miles that way, and Apple's 15 miles that way. And so we're educating change makers. That's the mission. And we do that through 3 design elements. The teaching of SEL, social emotional learning, that's our first and foremost, I think, pillar, I would call it. The teaching of innovation, and then leading edge academics, right? We're constantly trying to be on the forward side of how do you teach, how do kids learn, and I think that's a big draw. Those pillars, so to speak. But I think more than anything, that I hope we represent what is best about Silicon Valley, right? Asking big questions, putting a lot of emphasis on creativity, making sure our decisions are data driven, a little bit of irreverence too, right? We're having a good time here. And I mean, Google was founded by people who were having a little bit of a good time as they were designing this incredible thing we all use now. And so I think parents, a lot of the parents in the area, they come out of the startup culture, or they were part of Google when it was early, or Facebook, or any of the companies that we now know. And I think they saw Synapse. This is I'll be going into my 10th year. The school's about 12 years altogether, depending on how when did it really start? Was it in that church basement? Was that year one, or was it year one when they came out of the garage? Like we're still not sure, but we think it's 12 years. But I think that they became captivated with a school that was similar to any startup organization. We had to roll up our sleeves, be scrappy, pivot a lot, get lots of feedback, and they wanted their kids to be part of something that they could see grow, and that they could have a voice in that school's succession.
Can you share a little bit more about those three pillars with us, Jim? Like if we're a day in the life of a student at Synapse, from start to finish, how would we see those three pillars at play in classrooms?
I'd really like to know how you teach creativity and innovation, because it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. You're absolutely right. To break it down, like in the day in the life of a third grader, or a fifth grader, eighth grader, SEL is immersive here. Lots of schools are now talking about social emotional learning. Certainly in the States, I imagine there as well. And they may have like an add-on class. So we do have a class the kids will go to. It's not every day. It's called self-science, where we teach our EQ, emotional intelligence competencies. But the day in the life, kids would come in. There's various ways we do an EQ check-in. We have little sticks and cups as one simple way any school can do this. Right? Number 1 to 10. You come in the morning, and if you didn't get the breakfast you wanted, you might put in a 4, or whatever. Or if you're excited because there's a big project today, kids come in, put a 10. And then they can move those sticks throughout the day, right? Because we want to show them like, right? Adults in the morning don't get their coffee. There may be like a 4 coffee, an 8, 1 o'clock. It's, I need more coffee, 6, second cup, 9. And so we're teaching them that your emotions, it's just information, right? And so you would see that for sure. You would see that throughout the day.
And how do they respond in that explicit class? Do they understand the benefit of it, and they know the reason why you're teaching that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing too. So certainly in kindergarten through 4th grade, that's our lower school. The kids are gaining a vocabulary. They're really understanding those competencies. What does it mean to exercise optimism, right? What does it mean to recognize patterns? Those are 2 of our competencies. And by 4th grade, they really are understanding this. They enter middle school, and I'll just be honest, then they say, what is this EQ stuff, And so we have to sort of, hide the vegetable kind of thing, in order to get them to understand that it doesn't just stop in lower school. And even my own daughter, who's now a sophomore in high school, but she would say, oh my gosh, self-science. But by the time they get to 8th grade, right, some of that adolescence, I wouldn't call it cynicism, but that's sort of like questioning. I'm telling you, every single one of those 8th graders, they go through something called an exit ticket as they move off to high school, and they present to their families, to their teachers, to myself. I go to all these are presentations. They do a project, and then they present that project. and they go through sort of the history of their experience at Synapse. And every time, the vast majority of these kids discuss the importance of SEL, right? They don't want to admit it in 7th grade, but as they're ready to move out into 9th grade and leave Synapse, it's amazing that it really, that K-8 experience allows them to, I think, reflect deeply and to understand that these skills, how to handle yourself so you can help other people, how you set goals up, how you achieve those goals, how you take risks, they matter for sure.
Do you notice a difference between boys and girls in their understanding of social emotional learning?
It's a good question. I don't know. It's not clear to me. I wouldn't say there's, the girls are sort of more into it than the boys. I think it's about the same. Remember, this is a school that is, founded on this key concept of SEL. And so parents are self-selecting in for that, teachers self-selecting in for that. And it's being, really, the foundation is not just here at school, but it's also at home, right? So it's being reinforced when the kids go home. Yeah. So I think we don't see a lot of naysayers on that at all.
Okay. And Jim, as far as that third pillar is concerned,
we haven't got to creativity and innovation yet.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Maybe we do
creativity.
Yeah. The second one. I was jumping ahead here, but sorry. Yeah. In terms of creativity and innovation, what would that look like?
Yeah. So creativity, we're just a really creative school. You guys saw it, and we really lean heavy on that. But we are project based, and that's part of our leading edge. We can get to that as well, leading edge academics. So we're constructivist infused. I wouldn't say we're purely constructivist. I just sent an email to my staff last week about this because they sometimes get.
Don't you have a band called
really
the Constructivists there?
And we have a band called the Constructivists as well. Yeah, we do. And we absolutely believe in constructivism, but I'm quick to say, look, we're also leading edge, right? There could be, and there are some people that question the constructivist approach in terms of even teaching numeracy to young kids, right? There's I think he's a French educator, mathematician, who's saying you can't do it. And he's also got a neuroscience background. So back to creativity and innovation, we have an innovation model, just like we have an SEL model. And so when kids are trying to tackle a problem or a project in the classroom, they would pull out the innovation model. And it's not dissimilar to the IDEO, which is nearby here. You might know IDEO, come out of Stanford. There are similar sort of design thinking models. It's a little more heavy on innovation and creativity, but they're going to use that model almost every day. And then the other piece of innovation, I think, where kids are going to really experience it is we have a makerspace. And I think you guys saw that big warehouse, right?
Yeah, we did.
Did you see that when you were there?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's only been amplified since you've left. I mean, it's incredible. And so they're in there more than ever. Each kid is rotating through that space constantly. So I think the space, sort of that third teacher of the space, is also exhibiting and allowing them to think creatively, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about interdisciplinarity and having project-based learning and the benefits and challenges is a big part of our whole podcast series, really.
Yeah.
But there is a tension there, and we get this from other educators in terms of, they just need to learn some things, in silos to an extent. They just need to learn their maths, and then they can go and apply it in interdisciplinary ways. How do you see that tension? Because another thing with inquiry-based learning, it's very controversial, I guess you could say, among staff here, as to how open that inquiry should be, or how, because I think for some kids, if the inquiry is so open that they really don't get any purchase, they don't have a framework through which to think about problems. How do you see that tension play out at Synapse?
Yeah, I mean, I think first you have to acknowledge it. It's there. And so when I first was head of school, I was, insecure, so I would never admit it, right? I'd be like, no, we're doing it all. And because I was like, what am I even doing? I'm an imposter. But now I'm like, no, it's real. there is tension there. And certainly the vast majority of high schools in this area, there's a certain emphasis on speed and accuracy in terms of mathematics, right? And so that's just a reality. So how we address it is we constantly talk about it, and like, let's talk about it. Let's get feedback from families. Interestingly, compared to what's going on at Scotch is the opposite, in that our teachers are questioning when I'm like, hey, how do we know the kids have acquired the math skills, for example, by the time 8th grade? They need these algebra skills and these geometry skills. And they'll push back on that, because they're so heavy on creative mathematics and conceptual mathematics and inquiry-based learning. And so I've got to convince this superstar cast of teachers that I have that, hey, there's a reality. I get it. I'm with you. I'm on your team, And but we've got kids that are going off to a public school down the road called Menlo Atherton. Great school, big, comprehensive, American, football, rah high school, but kids aren't going to be able to just sort of slot in some sort of creative space there. They're going to have to be able to tackle that placement test and handle some of that homework. And so we've made some concessions, I would say.
Well, can we talk about your teachers before we move on briefly? Because, yeah, they do definitely. I've had a look at some of the reviews and the bios. They do look like superstars. They've got a lot of range. How do you define range, firstly? And why do you choose teachers with range? And give me some examples of the teachers' range.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot say enough good things about the teachers. And I'm not just, any head or principal could be like, oh, my teachers. No, I am profoundly grateful and fearful that these folks will leave, right? Like that's a tension point for me, because just in mass, we don't have anyone here who's mailing it in, so to speak. They are really invested, really engaged. And again, they're self-selecting into a special community. It's intense for sure, but they want that. And so I would say, in terms of defining range, I would say they're gonna have to have the ability to love their subject matter. If they're in the upper grades, if they're in the middle school, right, they're gonna have to love that. Because our kids are bright, and our kids are going to want that. So they're going to have to love their specific area: science, math, art, computer science. But they're also going to have to be able to handle an array of kids, right? We've worked really hard to be a diverse community. We've been fortunate to make a lot of headway there as well. But they're also going to have to understand SEL. It's a big piece of it. And like, what does that mean in terms of handling kids who are misbehaving? What does that mean in terms of communication? I would say another way they're going to have to extend, the range, so to speak, is they're going to have to be heavy communicators to parents and colleagues, highly collaborative, right? So they can't just go into the silo. They can love their subject and be really good at it. Too bad. You're going to be collaborating. You've got associate teachers working with you. We've got specialists coming in and out. So it's highly collaborative.
And you've got a fairly flat
as well.
Hierarchy too, don't you?
Yeah, it's gotten a little more. When I first got here, it was very flat, and I wanted it that way. I put most of the resources into the classrooms, right? The teachers are the ones having the high impact. But I was told by, I had some consultants working with me. They were like, eventually you're going to get to a size, Jim, where you're going to need an associate head of school. You're going to need a lower school head. And I remember being, no, I don't need any of that. I can do it all. And wrong. And so I've now brought in, we have division heads, associate head, and just a few other leadership team members. So you're right. It's not too hierarchical, but that's a tension point too, because some of these teachers want to extend themselves with leadership opportunities too, right? So how do you provide for that? Because I don't want them going anywhere, but at the same time, not create hierarchy for the sake of hierarchy and create bureaucracy. They already meet enough. So I have some personal hangups around that too.
And
for sure.
How do you attract the best teachers?
So I think one way you do it is you just you keep the best teachers, right? Like, because if you have great teachers, deserve great colleagues. And so when we and then in that process of hiring, we are very inclusive, right? So people come in, they're going to meet they want to, right? You want to meet who you're going to work with. And so we make sure that they meet those teachers. And every time I hire someone new, they're always like, wow, I was super impressed with that group of middle school teachers, or I was super impressed with that third and fourth grade team. And so that's one way to sort of attract them. But I think it's also some basic stuff, and I make it very clear and explicit to my staff. I actually created a slide deck, sort of, and I call it a guidebook to working at Synapse. It's sort of, because we're different. I was thinking about, like, if you were going to Australia, like, you need a guidebook, right? And I'm like, so you're coming to Synapse, you need a guidebook, because we're a little weird and we're doing things a little differently. And I say in this deck, in this guidebook, so to speak, that, like, we're going to pay you top of market. Like, we pay at the highest end. I've done salary comparisons locally and across and nationally, and because of the cost of living here, this is, the highest salaries for teachers are here and in New York City. But I'm just very clear, like, we're paying you super well. And by the way, if you think we're not, go out, like, and to have an interview and come back and tell me what you find out. Like, it's almost like I'll price match, like, if they don't believe me. And so they believe me, and they're like, you're right. And so we pay them what they deserve. And that's a burden on the school in some ways, in terms of finances, but that's a big way to keep them and attract them, because they all talk, right? That's a thing too. And then I think probably the most important thing to keeping and attracting is allowing creative freedom, back to creativity. Like, we just don't have a lot of meddling by administrators. Like, we just don't. And they have a lot of space to create and to experiment and try things out. And the way this sort of is kept in check, I think, is because they're collaborating, that they are going to sort of self-police if someone gets a little off track, right? Because the teachers are all working together. It's demanding for sure, but that freedom to experiment and do really interesting projects with kids and take risks, I think for most American teachers, or certainly teachers around here, like, that's something they can't get in most places.
Okay, and as far as that third, I just want to return to that third pillar about leading academics, and because there was an amazing scene when I was wandering around the top level of the school, and I looked down, and I remember you saying that there was a neuroscience lab, I believe it was a research center embedded with the school, and you could literally almost observe the classrooms from on high, and you've got scientists looking into the neuroscience of learning and that kind of thing. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I think that's very much a unique model that I've never seen in another school.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. I'm really thrilled with that side of things here. So we have what's known as the Stanford Synapse Brainwave Learning Center. So we have a brainwave center here on campus that is a replica of what they have over at Synapse, or excuse me, at Stanford. And we have all kinds of devices in there, but the thing we use the most on kids in terms of research and helping understand learning and the brain is we have EEG sort of head nets that go on kids, and we do novel experiments to look at kids' numeracy. How are they interpreting numbers, language? So little kids, going in, how the symbolic recognition, and work with Stanford. We have researchers here, and so we're constantly again asking these questions. Our Brainwave Learning Center, we now have an assistant or associate director, as well. So Liz Tamorian and a woman named Radhika, they run it. They have, they also have jobs over at Stanford, right? So they're they're in the research department over there as well. And we're just really fortunate to have that partnership, bringing practitioners, we're the practitioners and the researchers together to ask questions around learning in the brain. and to have our teachers be able to like meet with these neuroscientists. These are neuroscientists, right? And say, I have this question.
As professional development for your staff, that must be an amazing thing to be in dialogue with these, leading neuroscientists in education.
Yeah, it's massive, and the teachers would say that too, and because right, you often will bring in these outside experts to the teachers in those sessions. And I can remember being a teacher, and I'm like, who is this person? I got a lot to do here. What's going on? Really, I got to listen to so and so from wherever, and like that goes away, right? Because Liz and Radhika, they do lunch duty, right? They come in the classroom. They're doing pick up and drop off. Right. They've got to do all this. They're one of them. And it's just this dialogue that is so fluid and constant. It's incredible to have that resource here on campus just for that reason. But then, you extend it back to leading edge, and, you're getting to be able to, look at kids, how their brains are reacting in certain settings, and then have conversations with the neuroscientists at Stanford on what could this mean sort of for a class of kindergartners who are trying to learn to read. Because we're not looking at individuals. We're not like, hey, Johnny, look at that. We don't want to get into any of that. That could get really dicey. It's more of like, okay, here's a kindergarten class. We showed them certain symbols in September, and then we did the same exercise in January and in May, and then here's what the graphs look like, and then we talk, right? Like what could this mean? What could we do differently, or what should we keep the same? So that's when we talk about.
Go ahead. Some of those lessons, then the teaching becomes experimental, I guess, as well. So you've got teachers mindful of the scientists observing things, so they almost. Perhaps some of the lesson designs are experimental in nature, which would be super fun, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think back to that, to our makerspace, which is really it's become sort of an engineering and design space. There, you'll see that there as well, where like they're building stuff, and I was over there a couple months, probably less than 2 months ago, looking at they were building a giant. It was, all made of wood. It looked like a roller coaster, but it was actually an element. We did a project with American Ninja Warrior. You guys know that show, right?
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah.
Yeah,
so we had some of the Ninja Warriors here on campus, and we were designing elements, but in a way that would allow for inclusivity for those who may be disabled. Right. So this year we had a really big focus on disabilities, because we have a change maker that every year we choose and then sort of put up top and focus our whole curriculum around this change maker. This year was Judy Human, who's a disability rights activist here in the United States, and responsible for so many laws that help not only people who are physically handicapped, but also those kids in schools who might have learning disabilities. But so back to that scene was they were designing a Ninja Warrior element where you were sitting in some sort of contraption, and you had to slide down and pump the brakes with your hands, again, because it was supposed to be inclusive. And so I had this kids, up on this ramp, and they, helmets on, and the teacher turned to me. I'm like, what's going on here? And he's like, well, we'll see if it stops. And I think it was called like a shuffleboard thing where you pump the brakes and then you landed. It's somewhere down below, and if depending where you landed, you get points. But it was huge, right? It's it was just giant, like half an American football field. And I'm like, okay, like, let's see what happens, And sure enough, the kid's coming down, and he's hanging on. He's in a wheelchair because he's doing this from that perspective, and it didn't quite stop, but everyone jumped out and grabbed it, and then they were like, okay, we got to fix that. We got to fix the brakes on that, and but that for the teacher to be able to have like the head of school come in and turn and know I'm gonna be I'm not only okay with it, I'm like excited about it, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And it's awesome. Kids, there was no kid in that moment disengaged from what was going on. Right?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? I work in design as well, so I do a lot of things, making all sorts of different products, and I want to know what's your take on failure. And like I can make a whole bunch of things reasonably well. I can make a nice ukulele. I know all the problems that I'm going to face along the way, and then when you teach a student how to do it, it's virtually impossible that they're going to make one to the same quality as what I could, unless I stage them through the entire process, which I wouldn't want to do, because you have to have that useful ignorance, I think is a good term for it. So what's your approach to allowing students to make things that you can clearly see are wrong and are not working properly, and you know what the answer is, or your teachers know what the answer is?
Yeah. We are very clear that we believe mistakes are beautiful. We say as much. We have values. It's like really written and codified there. And so I think our math teachers and our maker team and our science teachers, STEAM, they embrace that ethos and that ethic, or that principle perhaps, more than anybody. And kids just know that. They know it's a safe place to mess up. It's okay. And so just modeling it, constantly reminding them of this, because we do have kids and adults, who are, prone to be perfectionists, and that can be tough. A lot of our kids are really bright. They come from families were super successful and bright themselves. And so we have to embed that in everything we do here, that it's okay. We have to message it. We have to be intentional about it. We have to show that, right? Like, so I, even on Friday, we had an assembly about National Poetry Month. One of our teachers, Hannah, who is a third, fourth grade teacher, her class presented on this, and we did like just a simple pocket poem, or poem for your pocket. And so everyone had to write a poem, and then when you're on campus, you walk around and you can say, here's my poem, or hey, can I read your poem, or read me your poem. And I did my Friday video, and I read my poem, right? And I don't think it was, and I said it was a rhyming poem. I'm pretty sure it wasn't correct. But I just put it out there on YouTube, and I said to the parents, hey, if I can read my goofy poem to you right now, your kids can read it to you. So go ask them for their poem, right? So it's like little things like that, modeling that we're gonna take a flyer on this and see how it goes. And then I think in the classroom, like in that maker space, that's going to be a judgment call, right? Because you don't want a kid to do something that they can get hurt doing, or you don't want them to go down a line of thinking that's going to really take their project somewhere they don't want to go
at certain points, right? Now,
yeah,
I think everything you're saying sounds like it's based on the assumption that all adults in this situation agree with that philosophy. So are you in that position where both parents and teachers all agree with that philosophy? Or has there been times where you need to kind of step in and have a little bit of an argument with someone about that?
Yeah, no, sometimes you do, right? Sometimes you do. It's because you can't assume everybody has shared meaning, right, and understanding. We're really good at it, but it's not always going to be the case. And so occasionally you will have teachers who will disagree with our philosophy, our methods. They want a more traditional sort of approach. They don't want interdisciplinary learning. They want more sort of a didactic, this is how you learn. This is what you need to know. This is how you do it. Give it back to me. And like I said, what happens is it's such a collaborative environment. This will come right back to me. We're highly relational, but there isn't any sort of, it's not gossip. It's more of like, hey, this is a situation going on here. And then we'll have a conversation. We'll have lots of conversations back to SEL, back to the framework of SEL. The benefit of the doubt is always extended, right? Both directions, every direction. We give it to kids, parents, and teachers. I'm like, so you got to give it to me too, even though I'm the boss. And then we have a conversation. So if we have a teacher who doesn't believe in this certain philosophy or method, then what happens every year? There may be one or
You fire
maximum
them.
2 who are like, look, yeah, they're out. This is see this. These are the tiers of my staff right here. No, no, not at all. They come in and they say, look, I'm going to move on, and I'm like, great. How can I help you? Like, that's really how it goes. Right. And so we've been fortunate up until this point about those types of things. Where the tension really is with parents sometimes, right? Where they're like, they're talking to their friends
and they're thinking, this isn't how I learned, sort of thing.
Yeah. Like, or they're driving along, their kids, going to soccer practice, and they've got other kids from other schools, and they're all, there's kids in the back saying, well, look how fast I can do my times tables. And then, they get home, and then they ask their son who's like a Synapse kid, and they're like, okay, you go. And the kid is like, I can't do it. And then they come into my office like, oh my God, and you just have to be clear with families, where what we do and what we don't do. And then just let them make their decisions, and so trust, you got to build a lot of trust, and it's daily, it's hourly. I don't think there's any secret to it. You just got to be transparent and authentic, and, show your work, so to speak, as a head of school. And if at the end of the day, a parent's like, look, I want a more traditional school, that's okay. Like, then, because we're not going to do that.
Okay. I actually wanted to ask now, maybe a bit of the elephant in the room with some principals and schools, but tech use, in the classroom. How often,
We were talking about COVID a bit before, but I think the next big pandemic is potentially this addiction to technology.
We've got social media and all the challenges that come with that. Yeah,
context
and I imagine
shifting.
Your parent body has a lot to say about how much they're prepared for their kids to be using technology, what they would avoid, perhaps more of an intimate knowledge these parents than most would have on the challenges that come with tech use. And it sounds like you've got a lot of so much of an emphasis on experiential learning, immersive learning, where you probably don't even need to have a device in your hand at all. Where do you stand on that question?
Yeah, no, it's a big one. And I think the pandemic has caused a lot of issues for a lot of kids everywhere. And even here, right? We purchased a whole bunch of iPads. So the lower school kids, there's, kindergartners and first and second graders, when they went into, we had to do some distance learning at the beginning. We did half days and then half days at home. And that's how we handled it. They got used to their iPads. And so we're not a tech heavy school. I think you guys came, you probably saw that. Like, we don't have lots of screens everywhere. We see tech as a tool. For sure, it's heavier usage than I would like at this point. And again, I think we're going to have to recalibrate now that we're sort of out of the emergency phase of the pandemic. But I can tell you, we have loads of parents here who work at all those places, and they're the most vocal to me about the downsides of the stuff they're building, right? Like that. They're the one that, and I will say to them, like, oh, wait a minute. So you're all over me about blocking YouTube. You work there, like, it's like, they're like, no, you don't understand. I don't want my kid anywhere near this stuff. I'm like, you're an executive there. Like, wait a minute. And they'll say, yes, I know. And that's the problem, and it's really eye-opening and really interesting, right? To have those conversations with families.
And what do they say? Why do they, just delve into it a little bit deeper? Why don't they want their kids using YouTube excessively?
I think it's the same stuff that we all sort of know, right? That the algorithms, they're still trying to sort things out too, right? This is one opinion, but because the Silicon Valley is getting beat up in the press a lot, in the past couple of years, for sure, certainly in America. And not that I know everybody, I mean, who am I? But like, the people I meet who are working at these companies who have influence, they're incredibly good people. And they're trying to sort things out. I think that's really what it comes down to. And just the speed of growth of some of the tools. it's hard to manage, right? And so that's their fear. Like we haven't quite figured out how to keep this out of the hands of X, Y, and Z, or how to protect kids from these things. They're working on it. They're trying, but that's their fear. That how we can't just like we can't allow kids into every site that they want to be in. And so we put some blocks on, but we were open to school, right? We're not really into constraints and restrictions. But I think that's how I would see it, that they are just they see how the sort of the soup is made, so to speak, and they're just like, look, we're not done with that recipe yet. So I don't want my kid eating the soup yet.
It could be poison.
It's really.
Is there a question around, have you had conversations around just the amount of screen time that a kid could have in any given day? Because it's such a tricky one, because over the course of, say, 5 lessons that they have or whatever they're doing that day, that it's hard to coordinate how, among all the teachers through the day, how much an iPad might be needed, but
right.
But I'm interested in that. Is there sort of a bit of a, not a hard limit, but how much time should a kid be looking at a screen in one day?
Yeah, no, we have all those conversations. We don't have a set limit, set number. Not that I know of anyway. Some teachers may have set that up themselves. Again, they have a lot of freedom in their classrooms. But we've brought in speakers. We've brought in those who know the ins and outs of what is the right amount, what's not the right amount, and have lots of parent dialogues around this as well. But we just set up a culture where there's just not, it's not emphasized, tech's not emphasized. And there is an element here where our kids at Synapse anyway are a little, they're not naive. That's the word that comes in, but there's an innocence that's still here. And so a lot of our middle school kids, like, they don't have phones. Right? My own daughter, like, she got a phone, eventually, because she wanted to ride her bike to school. I'm like, well, we probably should get her a phone if she gets a flat tire or something like that. But there's not a big drive here. That's not part of the culture of the school. And again, I think that's an element of self-selection somewhat, but it's just not. You just don't see it here. It's just not a part of things. And so I could be wrong, but I don't see it as a major issue. Again, the pandemic has pushed this a little further than I'm comfortable with, but we've got it, I think, a decent handle on it at this point.
Okay, we've sort of probably got to wrap it up pretty soon, Steve, and let you go, Jim. But I do have a couple more final questions, and Steve might have a few more. But I wanted to ask, where do you see Synapse in the next 5 years? If you could imagine what Synapse would be in 5-10 years. And second question, is this model, is it a scalable model? Is there some limit to how big a school like Synapse should be? And could we see these models popping up in Australia and elsewhere in the world? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about this stuff all the time. And so, for the first question around the 5-year, where are we going to be in 5 years? I'm really adamant to make sure that we keep a focus on our sort of core product, right, which is K-8, right? To make sure whatever we do, because we're constantly growing and doing things. We just acquired a brand new building nearby. We doubled our footprints in terms of our campus. We're going to be growing, building out a preschool, so that's happening. That'll happen in the next 5 years. So we're going to go into early childhood, which is amazing. But we'll focus on the K-8. Like, that's where we're really good. That's what we've really proven we can do. And so I want to make sure that continues. Slight changes, but continues to move forward. I think we will also have a bigger presence in terms of research and presenting that research back to the Brainwave Learning Center, our partnership with Stanford. I think you'll see more and more of us asking interesting questions and tackling certain things, doing the research and then presenting, and hopefully partnering with other schools as well. That's a big piece of what I would like to see happen. So in the next 5 years, it's really like I said, we're doubled our footprint, so we've got to program that building more or less. It's a giant sports facility actually that we took over, wow. Indoor soccer fields and basketball courts, and just it's amazing. We have partners in there that we work with, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to go there. But I think the research piece and the early childhood piece, the next 5 years are a big deal.
Have you got any international partners? Any schools in Australia, Scotch maybe?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. You'll have to,
a bit shifty.
I'll have to check. Yeah, no.
I'll get back to you.
Back to the scalable question. When I first came to Synapse, that was part. Even on my interview, that was part of it. Was like, hey, we're going to have a Silicon Valley Synapse, and then we're going to expand it elsewhere. And I was really drawn to that model. I can tell you, it's over my 9 years now. I'm like, wow, it's hard enough to do one of these. And so, I get asked this a lot, like, well, how about a Synapse here? And I'm like, all right, okay. So back to the question, I think you could do this elsewhere. I think you could bring it to Australia. I think you could bring it to New York. You could bring it to places that have a large enough population, not big, like back to your, like, what's the right size. I think, but just enough families who are willing to trust the school with something interesting and novel, right? And are able to partner as well. So I do wonder, if you go here in America, if we were trying to open up one of these schools in a conservative area that really doesn't have in that area a mindset that things can get done, I think that would be really hard to convince the parent population in that community. But I think you could open one in New York. I think you could have one in Boston. Absolutely. And I think now we've proven the concept, right? And so I do wonder where that could be something that's not too far down the line, because that was really part of the origin to expand.
Yeah, I always looked to America as being slightly ahead of us. I think primary school I went to America, and then I went to Scotland all in the same year, and it felt like I went from the future to the present to the past. So us being in the present, but so what have you seen that's happened in education in America over the last few years that we can kind of expect to deal with over here? Because the social emotional learning is relatively new to Australia, I think, compared to the level that you're doing it in the States. What else do you think? What's on the horizon for the rest of the world to catch up?
Yeah, I think SEL is becoming ubiquitous here. It is scaring some of our more conservative lawmakers. There's a few Republicans who are trying to write laws to ban SEL, like in Oklahoma and things like that, which is really ridiculous. But it's not going to go anywhere. I don't know. So I think that just says that it is now everywhere. If it's in Oklahoma, it's everywhere. And I think what is happening here in terms of change or growth or a positive momentum around high stakes testing, even the SAT, the ACT, entrance exams, those things are really being called into question as a gating mechanism, right? To allow kids into colleges, or in our case, into high schools, right? That's happening. That's a positive from the pandemic, because these kids couldn't show up to these test centers, right? And so they were like, well, we'll just not require the tests. And the kids were allowed into colleges and high schools and wherever, and they're doing fine. And so then it was like, wow, wait a minute. Why do we have this whole industry around the SAT? And from that, you're seeing it fall back throughout high school and into middle school and lower school too. So I think that's a real positive that perhaps will jump across the Pacific and get to you guys too. But questioning high stakes testing, questioning assessment, right? How are we evaluating kids, and what's the fallout? But if we are going to continue to do it in the way we've done it, because lots of kids get left behind, right?
Mm-hmm. Jim, we better let you go in a minute, but I just wanted to finish by, first of all, thanking you so much on behalf of Scotch for giving us an hour of your time. We're just really grateful, and and for giving us your time back in 2019, because that kind of sparked a huge amount of questions.
Yeah, we've definitely
about
talked about it a lot.
We have since then.
It was a big memory for us, that trip.
Yeah, so we really appreciate your time.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, it is humbling to be able to do this. You know, I'm so passionate about it. I mean, you kidding me? Like, I try to talk to my kids about it and my wife, and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, not again. You know, can we stop with the emotional intelligence? Like, okay, we get it. Grit, Dad. I need grit. I get it.
Well,
some final questions that you got?
Yeah, my very last one before we go is Steve was just involved with this amazing foil board making project where a bunch of our kids made literally, you know, figured out the physics of it all, designed them all, created these foil boards, and now they're off surfing them. And now they have their own foil boarding podcast now that they're 18-year-old uni students. And I just wondered if there was an opportunity to just have a dialogue between, you know, one of your staff in the engineering faculty or STEM on a project like that, because that, I'm just speaking on as an observer of Steve's work, that was an absolutely powerful learning experience for those kids.
It was just a bunch of people getting together with a shared passion, teacher and students, to do a club type activity that was non-assessed. There was no structure to it. There was no teaching involved, and
I wouldn't say that.
I mean, but there was teaching on. It was very even. I mean, I learned a lot of things about that particular project from the boys as well, like how to ride the boards more than making them. But we all worked together and had some pretty interesting outcomes, and we didn't actually know what the outcome would be. But yeah, they end up running their own podcast, which is pretty impressive, and it doesn't have to be, you know, foil boards, but there's that application can transfer to many different projects, and it's proper project-based learning in a team environment with no set outcome.
Yeah, no, I love. We should keep talking. Are these motorized foil boards or just foil boards?
No, just you know, the two legs of the motors. Yeah,
you pump them. These ones.
Oh yeah, I rode with one of our parents who's into the the motorized ones. I was on them last summer, and my gosh, I can't use the expletives, but I got absolutely shellacked, as they say, smashed. You know, I was on the bay, right in the bay here, and it's not fun under the Bay Bridge, San Francisco, but those types of projects are our team here would love that. I mean, we're always looking to partner with like-minded individuals and schools and educators. Absolutely. And we've expanded our maker team. We have 3 people in there now. Actually, we're adding a 4th. We'll have 4 people in there in starting next year. So yeah, I'd love that. Be great.
Yeah. We'll keep the conversation going then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got your final questions?
Yeah, no, that's it, Jim. We really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Books and music and all that.
Oh, music, yeah.
What album?
I'm just mindful of your time, Jim.
Give us.
Oh, sorry. Our final
deserted island. If you had one album to take with you, what would it be?
That I'm really into music, so that would be super hard.
You got one album.
I know one. That's like sort of like if there's one exercise, right? You could only do, and it's like it'd have to be the squat, right? Because like that's engaging the most muscles. But the boring. But I think if it was one album that I keep coming back, that I never get tired of, because it's just dense and rich, is I would say the Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique from 1989. Like it's so dense with samples. It was the album that like basically got them kicked off their record label because it was too experimental. Yeah. And so that album, that would be the album. Paul's Boutique. Beastie Boys.
Was that Rick Rubin? Did he do that? Do you know?
That was before. Rick Rubin was before. He signed them, right? And so he was like, they were original Def Jam band, but then they left Rick. They got this big fallout and went to Capitol Records and hit it big, but then produced this album that was super weird for hip hop at the time, but looking back is now sort of like,
seminal.
Beatles White Album for Beastie Boys or something.
Yeah.
Okay, and we do have one last question, which is any book you would recommend, and perhaps something on education. If there's any one or a handful of books that you think...
What should we read next?
Yep.
Because the book I'm always recommending is Range, right, by Epstein. I think that is not it's not a parenting book or an educator's book, but like that, I'm telling parents all the time, like that's a book that every parent should read. I think it should be essential. I would say essential reading. And so, in terms of, I'm looking around the office, like a book that that I would recommend that you read. That's a tough one. One that I handed to my staff that they're really excited about, actually, is this one. Thich Nhat Hanh, Work, right? The Buddhist, just passed away, but a Buddhist monk, philosopher, about how to find joy in meaning in each hour of the day. And he writes it about like, how do you go through work through with mindfulness. And I've read that years ago, and someone saw it in my office and was like, wow, I'd like to read it. So I got it for the staff. Said,
that book looked like you were sending your staff a clear signal there. Work,
No, it's actually right. It could be, but it's like literally like restroom meditation, answering the phone. Like, how do you approach it? So it's not at all about go go go, because our teachings are go go go. It's like slow slow slow.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
All right, Jim. Thanks for giving up your time, especially on a Saturday night.
Oh no, really enjoyable. You guys are great. Anytime. Thanks. I'm honored to be here. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Okay.
And all the best for the future and the next couple of years as we come out of COVID.
Yeah, you too. Hang in there, as you ride that wake.
All right. Cheers, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Cheers, guys. Yeah. See you.